North Atlantic Ocean, March 17th, 1943, 0237 hours. The storm came from nowhere, as they always did in these waters. Inside the cramped radio room of HMS Vigilant, a destroyer escort cutting through 12-foot swells off the coast of Iceland, Petty Officer Thomas Barnwell hunched over his receiver set. Static crackled through his headphones. The endless white noise of a hostile ocean, punctuated by the occasional burst of Morse from Allied convoys requesting position updates or weather reports. Then, at 0237 precisely, something else. A transmission. Faint, disjointed. Morse code stammering through the interference like a man gasping for air. Barnwell's pencil froze above his logbook. The signal was weak, almost swallowed by atmospheric noise, but unmistakable in its rhythm. 3 letters repeated twice. DKQ, DKQ. He knew that call sign. Every radio man in the North Atlantic Theater knew it. DKQ was the designated identifier for U-557, a Type VIC U-boat of the Kriegsmarine's 29th Flotilla, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Ottokar Paulsen. A vessel that, according to Allied intelligence and German naval records alike, had been sunk 4 days earlier by depth charges from the corvette HMS Petunia, 200 miles southwest of their current position. All hands lost. 43 souls claimed by the Atlantic. Barnwell leaned closer, his breath misting in the frigid air. The signal continued, fragmented and irregular. Thief licked signal, depth, light, signal, then nothing, just the hiss of the void. He tore off his headphones and bolted for the bridge. They thought the ocean had claimed them, but the Atlantic still had something to say. Part 1. The Hunter. U-557 was not an exceptional boat by the standards of the Kriegsmarine. She was one of hundreds, a workhorse of the Wolfpack era, sleek and deadly, but ultimately expendable in the grand calculus of total war. Commissioned in February 1941 at the Blohm and Voss shipyards in Hamburg, she was 220 feet of riveted steel, diesel engines, and human endurance compressed into a tube barely wider than a subway car. Her crew, 43 men, most of them younger than 25, lived in conditions that would break civilian morale within days. No privacy, no sunlight, air thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, diesel fumes, and rotting food. But U-557 had a reputation. Under Paulsen's command, she sank 11 Allied merchant ships in her first year of operation. Over 60,000 tons of cargo sent to the bottom. Paulsen himself was a phantom, methodical, silent, and utterly without mercy. British convoy commanders called him Der Schatten, the Shadow, because his attacks came without warning, often in foul weather when escorts were blind. By early 1943, however, the tide had turned. The Allies had refined their tactics. High-frequency direction finding, HF/DF, or Huff-Duff, allowed destroyers to pinpoint U-boat radio transmissions within minutes. Long-range aircraft now patrolled the mid-Atlantic Gap, the last refuge of the Wolfpacks. And most critically, the Enigma cipher, once thought unbreakable, had been compromised. U-557's final mission was a desperate one. On March 10th, 1943, she departed Brest, France, under orders to intercept convoy HX-229, a heavily laden formation of 40 merchant ships bound from New York to Liverpool. Intelligence suggested the convoy was lightly defended. Paulsen was instructed to attack at dawn on March 13th and withdraw immediately. He never made it. Part 2, the sinking, March 13th, 1943, 0520 hours. 48 symbol stopnia 14 and 27 symbol stopnia 32. The official report, filed by Lieutenant Commander Harold Oughton of HMS Petunia, was clinical in its brevity. At 0520 hours, sonar contact established bearing 215 degrees, range 1,200 yards. Contact classified as hostile submarine. Depth charge pattern released at 0523. Secondary detonation observed at 0525, consistent with internal explosion. Heavy oil slick and debris surfaced at 0532. No survivor cited. Contact presumed destroyed. The wreckage told the story the report did not. When Petunia's crew hauled up fragments from the oil slick, they found pieces of wooden decking, a shattered periscope housing, and a life jacket stenciled with the name Matrosober Jeffreiter Klaus Richter, a 22-year-old torpedo man from Kiel. There was no ambiguity. U-557 was gone. The Kriegsmarine confirmed it 3 days later. Halson and his crew were declared vermissed. Missing, presumed dead. Families received telegrams. Names were added to memorials. The boat's number was reassigned. And yet, sometimes the dead refused to stay silent. Part 3. The Ghost Transmission. March 17, 1943. The intercept logged by Petty Officer Barnwell should not have existed. When he delivered his report to the watch officer aboard HMS Vigilant, it was met with skepticism. U-boats did not transmit after sinking. The laws of physics, to say nothing of the laws of the sea, made it impossible. But Barnwell was adamant. He had heard it. He had logged it. The report was forwarded up the chain of command, and within 12 hours, it reached Station X, the top-secret code-breaking facility at Bletchley Park, 50 miles northwest of London. There, in a windowless room thick with cigarette smoke and the clatter of typewriters, a team of cryptanalysts led by a young mathematician named Peter Ashford began their analysis. The signal was anomalous in every sense. First, it had not been encrypted using the standard Enigma machine protocols employed by U-boat communications. It was raw Morse, hand-keyed, improvised, almost frantic in its rhythm. Second, the transmission bore no operational context. Standard U-boat distress signals included coordinates, damage reports, or requests for assistance. This signal contained none of that, just fragments. DKQ, Tiefe, Licht, signal, depth, light, signal. Third, and most disturbing, triangulation analysis suggested the transmission had originated from a position roughly 150 miles east of where U-557 had been sunk. Ashford's initial hypothesis was enemy deception. Perhaps the Germans had captured Allied radio equipment and were broadcasting false signals to confuse convoy routing. It was a known tactic, but something about the transmission's tone unsettled him. It felt desperate. He requested further monitoring. For 3 nights, Allied radio stations across the North Atlantic listened for any repeat transmission. None came. Part 4. The Search. March 20th to 24th, 1943. The Admiralty authorized a limited reconnaissance sweep. 2 Sunderland flying boats, long-range maritime patrol aircraft, were dispatched to the triangulated coordinates. They flew low, skimming the wave tops, searching for any sign of a surface submarine or debris field. On March 22nd, the crew of Sunderland King reported a large oil slick approximately 80 nautical miles south of the projected signal origin. The slick was fresh, less than 48 hours old, and stretched for nearly a mile. But there was no wreckage, no bodies, no periscope walk, just oil, spreading like a dark stain across the gray Atlantic. The pilot, Squadron Leader James Harding, circled twice before radioing back. Nothing visible. Slick too large for surface vessel. Possibly submerged wreck, venting fuel. Recommend sonar sweep. A destroyer group was diverted. Sonar operators combed the seabed for 3 days. They found nothing. The ocean, it seemed, had swallowed the answer whole. Part 5. The Theory. April 1943, Bletchley Park. Peter Ashford could not let it go. Late at night, after his shift ended, he returned to the intercept logs. He reread Barnwell's transcription 100 times, searching for meaning in the fragments. Tiefe, Licht, signal, depth, light, signal. Then, in a moment of clarity, he saw it. What if the transmission was not a distress call at all? What if it was a description? He pulled German naval terminology references and cross-checked the words. Tief, depth, as in water depth or ocean floor. Licht, light but also luminescence, glow. Signal, signal, transmission, beacon. Ashford wrote a single line in his notebook. Light at depth, signal for below. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Could it be possible that U-557 had not been destroyed outright? That she had sunk intact, settling onto the seabed with crew still alive inside the pressure hull? If so, the transmission might have been a final, desperate attempt to send word to the surface. Not a plea for rescue, but a testament. A message that said, "We were here. Do not forget us." Ashford submitted his theory to naval intelligence. It was filed away, marked speculative, and never acted upon. The war moved on. U-557 faded into the endless ledger of the lost. Part 6. The silence. For 76 years, U-557 lay undisturbed. The war ended. Veterans aged and died. The North Atlantic became a highway of container ships and oil tankers, indifferent to the bones beneath. Occasionally, fishermen would snag nets on something deep and metallic, but no one investigated. The ocean floor was littered with wrecks, submarines, destroyers, merchantmen, all of them monuments to a war the world wanted to forget. But in the archives, the mystery persisted. Post-war declassification efforts in the 1970s and 90s revealed fragments of the March 17th intercept in British naval records. Researchers began to take notice. Theories proliferated. Ionospheric reflection. The signal had been bounced off the upper atmosphere, creating a ghost transmission days after the original. Equipment malfunction. Barnwell had misidentified a random burst of noise as Morse code. Soviet deception. Cold War-era intelligence suggested the USSR had salvaged U-boat wrecks and experimented with captured equipment. None of these explanations satisfied. In 2015, a German naval historian named Dr. Erika Mahler published a paper titled Phantom Signals: Unexplained Radio Transmissions from Lost U-Boats, 1942 to 1945. In it, she documented 7 separate incidents of transmissions originating from submarines confirmed destroyed. U-557 was among them. Mahler's conclusion was cautious but haunting. We cannot dismiss the possibility that, in rare cases, dying men found ways to send final messages, not for rescue, but for memory. The sea does not erase everything. The dead, it seemed, were not yet done speaking. Part 7. The Discovery. June 14th, 2019. 47 symbol stopnia 58 N 28 symbol stopnia 41 V. Depth 2,847 feet. The research vessel Agger's Eye, operated by the Norwegian Deep Sea Exploration Company Ocean Eye AS, was conducting a bathymetric survey of the mid-Atlantic ridge when its sonar detected an anomaly. The object was man-made, roughly 70 meters in length, resting upright on a silted shelf at a depth of 867 meters. The shape was unmistakable. A submarine. Within days, a remotely operated vehicle, ROV, was deployed. High-definition cameras descended through the blackness, illuminated only by LED arrays cutting through the perpetual night of the abyss. What they found was U-557. She lay almost perfectly intact. The pressure hull had not ruptured. The conning towers stood proud, encrusted with decades of marine growth. The deck gun was still mounted, aimed at nothing. But it was the interior footage that stunned the world. The ROV entered through a rupture in the forward torpedo room, likely caused by the depth charge blast, and navigated the flooded corridors. Inside the radio room, preserved in the cold, oxygen-starved water, the equipment remained eerily functional. Dials, switches, headphones hanging from a hook. And there, on the Morse key panel, the lever was pressed down, fully depressed, as if someone had been holding it when the water came in. Epilogue, the message. December 2019. After months of analysis, marine archaeologists and naval historians released their findings. The position of the wreck, 47 degrees, 58 minutes north, 28 degrees, 41 minutes west, did not match the coordinates of the March 13th sinking reported by HMS Petunia. It was 142 nautical miles to the east. This suggested one of two possibilities. U-557 survived the initial attack and limped away, only to sink hours or days later from cumulative damage. The Royal Navy sank a different submarine on March 13th, and U-557 continued operating until succumbing to mechanical failure or another unrecorded attack. But the most chilling discovery came from forensic examination of the radio room. Corrosion had preserved faint impressions on the Morse key surface, grooves worn into the brass contact plate by repeated use. Metallurgical testing suggested the key had been actively depressed for at least 12 hours before the pressure equalized and the room flooded completely. 12 hours. That meant someone had been alive inside U-557 long after she sank. Trapped in the dark, knowing rescue was impossible, they had done the only thing left to do. They had transmitted, not coordinates, not a distress call, just fragments. Words torn from the chaos of drowning and darkness. Tifa, licht, signal, depth, light, signal. Perhaps they had seen something in those final hours. Bioluminescence flickering outside the portholes. The faint glow of plankton disturbed by the sinking hull. Or perhaps they had simply meant, "We are here. Remember us. Do not let us vanish." On March 17th, 1943, their message reached the surface. And 76 years later, so did they. Part 8, The Voices. March 2020, Oslo, Norway. Dr. Erika Mahler stood in the archives of the Norwegian Maritime Museum, surrounded by recovered artifacts from U-557. They had been carefully preserved, cataloged, and now awaited permanent exhibition. Before her, spread across a steel examination table, lay the contents of the radio room. Corroded vacuum tubes, a water-damaged logbook reduced to pulp, the brass Morse key itself, now encased in protective resin. But it was the recordings that had brought her here. When Ocean Eyes ROV had explored the wreck, it had deployed hydrophones, sensitive underwater microphones capable of detecting even the faintest acoustic signatures. Standard procedure for marine archaeology. Most of the time, they captured nothing but the ambient groans of metal contracting under pressure, the distant calls of whales, the scrape of sediment shifting across the hull. This time, they had captured something else. The audio engineer had almost deleted it, assuming it was electromagnetic interference. But something made him listen again. Mahler pressed play on a laptop before her. Static. Deep, resonant static, like the breathing of the ocean itself. Then, beneath it, barely audible, a rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 tap. Morse code. Her hands trembled as she transcribed it, though she already knew what it would say. DKQ, Tifa, licht, signal. The exact transmission Petty Officer Barnwell had logged 77 years earlier. But the hydrophone recording had been made in 2019. The engineer's report noted that the sound appeared to emanate from within the wreck itself, specifically from the area of the radio room. Acoustic analysis suggested it was not a mechanical vibration, nor the result of water movement through corroded equipment. It was, for lack of a better term, a resonance. As if the metal itself had absorbed the signal decades ago and was now, in the presence of electrical equipment and sonar pulses, releasing it back into the water. A ghost in the machine. Mahler closed the laptop and stared at the Morse key. The brass contact plate still bore the faint impressions of the operator's final transmission, grooves worn by desperate, repetitive pressure. She thought of him, whoever he was, sitting in the dark as the water rose around his ankles, then his knees, then his chest, the air growing thin and foul, the cold seeping into his bones, knowing with absolute certainty that no one was coming. And yet he had stayed at his post. He had keyed the signal, over and over, for 12 hours, not because he believed it would save him, but because he refused to die in silence. Part 9, the names. The identification process took 18 months. German naval records, cross-referenced with crew manifests and family genealogies, allowed researchers to name 42 of the 43 men who died aboard U-557. The final name remained unknown, a crewman listed only as Ersatzmann replacement, likely a last-minute addition before the boat's final departure. Among the identified was Funkmatt Otto Weiss, the radio operator, 24 years old, born in Bremen, son of a postal clerk, joined the Kriegsmarine in 1940, trained at the Naval Signals School in Flensburg, transferred to U-557 in November 1942. His service record described him as diligent and proficient in Morse transmission under combat conditions. His last known photograph, taken in January 1943, showed a thin young man with wire-rimmed glasses and a shy smile, standing on the deck of U-557 in Brest Harbor. Snow dusted the conning tower behind him. His mother, Margarete Weiss, had received the telegram on March 20th, 1943. The Führer and the Commander-in-Chief of the Navy regretfully inform you that your son, Funkmatt Otto Weiss, is missing and presumed fallen in action. He died for Führer and fatherland. She had kept his room exactly as he left it until her death in 1967. In 2020, her granddaughter, Otto's niece, now 73 years old, traveled to Oslo to see the artifacts recovered from the wreck. She stood before the Morse key for a long time, silent. When asked if she wanted to say anything, she simply shook her head. Then she whispered, hat ist nach Hause geschafft. He made a home. Memory is the final transmission, and some signals never fade. Part 10, the theory revised. April 2021. A joint panel of naval historians, marine archaeologists, and acoustics experts convened in London to assess the findings and attempt, once and for all, to explain the March 17, 1943 transmission. 3 theories emerged. Theory 1, atmospheric reflection. The original signal had been transmitted during or shortly after the sinking, but atmospheric conditions, specifically ionospheric disturbances caused by solar activity, had delayed and distorted the transmission, causing it to arrive 4 days late and hundreds of miles displaced. Probability low. The delay was too long, and the signal strength inconsistent with ionospheric bounce. Theory 2, equipment echo. The Morse key, jammed in the depressed position, had created a low-frequency electromagnetic pulse as seawater flooded the circuit boards. This pulse propagated through the metal hull and was briefly detectable by Allied receivers under specific conditions. Probability moderate, but it did not explain the coherent Morse structure of the signal. Theory 3, the final operator, Otto Weiss, or another crew member trained in radio operation, survived the initial sinking and remained alive inside the pressure hull for an extended period. Using emergency battery reserves, he transmitted intermittently over several days, hoping against hope that someone would hear. The signal intercepted on March 17th was not a ghost. It was a dying man's last act of defiance. Probability high. The panel voted. The conclusion was unanimous. Otto Weiss had lived for days inside the tomb of U-557, sending his message into the void. And on March 17, 1943, someone finally heard him. Part 11, the memorial. September 3, 2022. A small memorial was unveiled in Brest, France, near the old U-boat pens where U-557 had departed on her final mission. It consisted of a simple bronze plaque mounted on a stone pedestal. engraved with the names of the 43 crew members. Beneath their names, a single line of Morse code. Minus, 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 minus. DKQ. Representatives from Germany, Britain, and Norway attended. Veterans' families, historians, survivors of the Atlantic War, now fewer than a dozen, all in their 90s. A British naval chaplain read a passage from Psalm 107. They that go down to the sea in ships, that do business in great waters. These see the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep. And then, as the sun set over the harbor, a single Morse transmission was broadcast from a vintage radio set, carried across the water by speakers mounted along the pier. DKQ, Tiefe, Licht, signal, depth, light, signal. The sound echoed across the old submarine pens, and for a moment, it felt as though the ghosts were listening. Epilogue, what remains? The wreck of you, 557 lies undisturbed now, protected by international maritime law. No further salvage operations are permitted. She rests as a war grave, a monument to men who died in a conflict they did not start and could not stop. But her signal endures. In naval museums across the world, visitors can listen to the reconstructed audio of the March 17, 1943 intercept. They can see the corroded Morse key, the faint grooves still visible on its brass surface. They can read the names of the crew and try to imagine what those final hours were like. And some, standing alone in the dim light of the exhibit halls, swear they can still hear it. Not through speakers or headphones, but deeper, closer, as if the signal never truly stopped. As if somewhere in the cold depths of the Atlantic, Otto Weiss is still transmitting, still hoping, still refusing to be forgotten.